Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Frogcast, where we have all things Kambo combos. Truly, no topic is off limits. Anything that is tangential or can be related to enhancing, supporting, or illuminating Kambo practice, we dive into it. And today, I have a dear friend of mine and special guest. He's going to share a really interesting perspective in a lens in which we can view Kambo and pairing it with other modalities. So I have Johnnie here, Johnnie Heider-Kuhn. Did I say your name right? Your last name?
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. So he's one of my fellow jungle adventurers, Kambo brothers, and he is a vitalist, an herbal vitalist, and Johnnie, a little bit about Johnnie. He is a clinical herbalist, holistic nutritionist, and founder of Earth Medicine Apparel Company, which is an organization supporting community led conservation and reciprocity initiatives. After over a decade in the botanical supplement industry, a transformative healing experience with Kambo in 2021 led him to Peru with me to study under indigenous Matses and Quechua wisdom keepers, including the legendary Johnny Java. And today he is dedicated to being a Kambo provider across the Front Range, especially in Colorado area, serving hundreds of clients by word of mouth with a special focus on helping fellow service providers. So I'm really excited to hear more about the different theories and thoughts and visionary explorations that your beautiful mind has brought to the forefront here to share with us. So, Johnnie, I'm so curious. Before we get into Kambo specifically, can you explain to people what the concept of vitalism actually is? Because I think a lot of people in the plant medicine world, including myself, may have an intuitive sense of what that entails, but don't necessarily have familiarity with that word.
Sure. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I often say that vitalism is really just affirming that there's an intelligent and immaterial force that's permeating life and moving towards health, right? And so I think for me, that's so fundamental to understanding vitalism because that's also kind of often the biggest point of argument in this kind of like pharmaceutical, scientific only mechanism way of understanding versus that there's also maybe an intelligent force that's moving towards health behind all of that. So, an example could be like when you cut your finger, you don't have to think about clotting or scabbing or rebuilding skin, maybe keeping it clean, but that like intelligence to heal that is automatic and constant and like running the whole show. So vitalists call this the vital force, right? And this is kind of a philosophy that, of course, draws upon an incredible amount of resource from East and Central Asian perspective, Greco-Roman understanding of health, and a lot of different approaches to understanding herbalism and natural healing that evolved in the Americas. And we could have a whole podcast on the history of vitalism, which we're not really talking about here, but it's really a system that's allowing us to again move from a foundation of there's an intelligence that's permeating life that's moving towards health, and the way that we feed it, the way that we move, the way that our lifestyle is, the herbs that we're consuming, all of these things impact our vital force. And then with that, in vitalism, we're really looking at symptom pictures, tissue states, physiology to give indications on how to bring them back into health and how to look for root causes that might be getting in the way of really supporting the vital force and having optimum health, right? Like focusing on fixing digestion and seeing if that impacts blood pressure and some of these other systems by having generally really just supportive, nutrient dense, gentle therapeutics. So a big piece of vitalism in practice is often starting with lifestyle interventions around hydration and movement, nutrition interventions, and then really adequately applied herbs that are about bringing tissue states into specific balance by working with energetics and these different systems. So Yeah, I think the other piece of vitalism is that it sees all of this as relational, right? Like within this intelligent system, all of this healing is relational, not just in like community or the therapeutic dynamic between a practitioner, but even just the relationships within the body that make up our organic organism and the relationships that we engage with these different earth medicines. So I see that also as kind of a big piece, at least in my understanding of vitalism.
Very cool. Yeah, that's fascinating and sounds like very all encompassing and holistic in its perspective. You mentioned energetics, and specifically, I know you and I have talked about herbal energetics and how herbal actions can be used as a framework for looking at something through the lens of vitalism. Can you break down a little bit for listeners what that actually means to look at any sort of medicine or intervention through that herbal, or I guess not herbal all the time, but an energetic lens or perspective?
Yeah, thank you. This Western vitalistic framework offers a couple of systems of understanding, generally plant-based medicines and foods and things that, like you said, are called herbal energetics and herbal actions. So we can just call them energetics and actions, right? So initially, energetics is words that we're using to describe just temperature, like hot, cold, neutral, moisture, like dried, moist, and tone, which is, kind of like the structural laxity or tension found in the tissues. And that's again to describe kind of how when taking that herb, its vital forces interacting with our vital force and causing energetic experiences. Like you take cayenne pepper and you feel hot, so we'd call that a heating herb, and it's stimulating circulation. So we see that as like a warming indication. Okay. And then we have actions, which are really it's kind of an amalgam of just dictionary definitions to understand direct action on different tissues and organ systems, right? So to kind of tie those concepts of energetics and actions together from an herbal point of view, I think of something like marshmallow root. Many people, maybe many listeners, are familiar or have had it. That's something that's often given to dry coughs and colds, and it's very like mucilaginous, and it feels just like really moistening. Like it actually causes more balance to the moisture level of the mucus and the mucus membranes. And when that happens in the presence of a dry, irritated cough, it cools the tissue down, reduces redness and swelling. So we call that cooling and moistening. Right. And then that effect on mucous membranes specifically has a word that we call demulcent, which is an action to say it has that moistening effect specifically on mucous membranes throughout the body, which then gives us a framework to be like, okay, so in what cases would I give that to someone? Like what does the tissue look like? What is it presenting as? What does that person look like? So I can start to match appropriately. So it's kind of a cool, fun system. I used to teach about this, and I taught it as like this bridge where it's bridging our understanding of physiology, of energetics, of things we can quantify, and of things that just are really there to sharpen our observation skills. Because all of this is about really applying our observation skills. Like practice informed research is something we've talked about a lot. Like we don't have as much research informed practice with Kambo. We have practice informed research, and same goes with a lot of herbalism stuff. So when we start to use language to define some of the observational things that we're seeing, that really informs how to apply them safely and how to share information about it, right? And understand how they're working even without a clinical study.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is just the similarity with like traditional Chinese medicine, where there's like this rich, extended historical use and philosophy developed. And it can be often poo-pooed by, medical science. But then there's no doubt that they're really dialed into something, and they're operating off of these patterns and observations, just like in vitalism. And I imagine there's some influence there, like you mentioned. But then in the end, science starts to catch up and realize that, like, oh, maybe there's something to this pattern recognition, and that from a scientific lens, you can start to see parallels between concepts and then like physiological pathways. For example, warming or heat inducing might be related to like inflammation, which is a mechanistic part of being human, right? There's a time and a place for inflammation to be a healthy part of our physiology, and it's gets a bad rap because of when it becomes rampant and there's excess heat. So I think it's really
Right.
cool, especially knowing you, and I know you're very scientifically oriented as well, and I think it's so important to be able to marry these two lenses and demonstrate to people that they're not opposing truth. They're actually just different sets of language and frameworks to explain reality and nature, but they're just two different versions of the same truth, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And different ways of just sharpening observation, right? Like through scientific lenses, we have one way, just like you said, of knowing of how do organ systems work? What are the mechanisms of actions when a peptide is metabolizing through a hepatocyte in the liver? Like there's all these things that we can look at and stuff, but yeah, Chinese medicine, it's interesting that you bring that up because that also, much like Ayurveda, they represent these unbroken ancient lineages of systems of thought and technology that are continuing to refine observations in systems that come from a specific way of thinking. And so we can certainly, like I work with acupuncturists and I've worked for a Chinese herbalism medicine company in the past as well. So I picked up just like little bits, but it's certainly not a system that I'm equipped to, consult people or work within. But a cool thing that comes up for me is, in Chinese medicine, they talk about the liver. And my understanding is that doesn't directly translate to just the liver itself, but in fact also the entire hepatic biliary system, parts of the small intestine that are all working in sync completely as a system. And so we can kind of tease that out in our own lens and start to understand, okay, if something's saying that it's a liver stimulating herb in Chinese medicine, is that something that we can see is actually working really dynamically with detox pathways and hormone regulation and some of these things that we might have a scientific understanding about. So yeah, really that kind of bridging thing I think is what's so interesting for me about this. Even knowing that Western vitalism, again has some definitely shadows in its history, but really constitutes a merging of different practices across a really big span of time that gave us these kind of frameworks to tie into our understanding of physiology.
Totally, totally. So I'm curious, like from a vitalist lens or framework, what are your thoughts about the energetics of Kambo as a medicine?
Yeah, oh, this has been fun. And in fact, I actually made myself what in the herb world we call monographs that are little documents that you just put together. We would have students do this at the herb school when I taught, and I went through it when I was a student, where you just put together, the names of the medicine, the energetics, the clinical actions, the common forms of dosing, cautions and contraindications, and conservation considerations. And so bringing all of these pieces of the whole ecological framework of working with an earth medicine together. And this was honestly stimulated because when I started talking to some of my vitalist mentors, like renowned herbalist Lisa Ganora, about Kambo, and I got to the like blood pressure drops and crazy parasympathetic activations and purging and all of this like intense stuff, eyebrows were kind of going up like, how is that vitalistic, right? That vitalism really preaches avoiding therapy, like heroic interventions and stuff. So I started really sitting with that and being like, okay, how can I orient my framework around? Because that's the model that I know the best. And it's allowed me, again, without having clinical evidence, to really start to look and sharpen my way of approaching working with Kambo and understanding its cautions and understanding how it's affected in the body. So kind of step one for like vitalism and Kambo was, how can I put words to the energetics and the actions that I'm witnessing? and what I'm seeing from not just my own direct experience, but from consulting other practitioners, right? All the stories we told when we're on our jungle trip or just in times that we're in community together, and from giving it to people myself, I've come to realize that Kambo is really unique in that it has a lot of mixed energetics, right? And a lot of herbs do too. Like, use the example of warming herbs can produce inflammation. Well, also a lot of warming herbs can have a secondary cooling effect, right? Where it has this sometimes counter irritation effect or a stimulation and then a relaxing. So with Kambo, I see that, right? So many people get hot, right? Not always, but many people generate a lot of heat in the body when it's working. And that seems to be the way that the peptides are metabolizing and doing different things. Johnny taught me to use water over the head in those cases, which you control water, fire with water. And then often people get really cold, especially in that parasympathetic state where there's a mix of kind of somatic releasing in the nervous system with like actual temperature regulation. So we're giving tea, we're giving blankets. So I'm seeing that effect in people's tissue. So I would say that's a primary warming effect with a secondary cooling effect, and that's energetics. And then when I think about moisture, I think about, okay, it's producing a lot of bile, saliva, sweat, vomit, sometimes, feces, like urine, like all of these detox phenomena are happening. Like, I often get detox through my eyes, like proteins coming out and stuff like that. So it's kind of like stimulating moisture, but then because that shifts electrolyte balance and that can deplete tissues, right? It has a secondary drying effect, which is why we do a lot of aftercare with rehydration, proper adequate rehydration. So that's been really interesting to see because, I might say, well, cardamom has a lot of mixed energetics, right? Like, smells like lavender. It can be really cooling, but it can also stimulate blood flow and bile secretion, and it can be moistening and drying. And it's such a staple in, world cuisine and in many households all over the world. So there's examples of where we see this outside of a strong medicine like Kambo, but it's really interesting when we see these kind of mixed effects, and then how can we then translate that to how we're supporting people through their actual experience, Like, one might say, oh, there's a sympathetic and a parasympathetic activation state. And then one might say during that sympathetic activation state, they're prone to getting really hot. And during that parasympathetic state, they're prone to getting really cold. So what can I do for palliative care in that moment that's supportive for that experience? So that's why this framework kind of is like, okay, it's kind of interesting to me. And then what's it doing to the tone? Is it's stimulating secretions, and then there's kind of this relaxing effect afterwards. And so it seems to have
Wow.
this like really interesting mixed effect.
Yeah, when you explain it from that framework, it helps me appreciate how energetically complex Kambo is. I mean, I think I knew that and felt that, of course, but hearing you apply the logic through the vitalism perspective is very insightful. And I wonder if that's also part of why Kambo is so unique, and so customizable, I guess,
Hmm.
for each person, because there's this concept that, I like to play with that can be applied to a lot of different sort of physiological processes or psychological processes or even like the healing journey. And it's this concept of pendulation, where the more you can kind of regulate between, these sort of dualistic states, the more you're able to kind of find balance in the center. And
Hmm.
when you have something like Kambo, that has this energetic profile of these seemingly opposite effects, it allows for that sort of pendulation process to be more customized and therefore maybe more adapted to each person's unique
Hmm.
physiological profile and needs in their energetics and their biology. It also brings up like the idea of hermetics and how, Kambo
Hmm.
can, and probably herbs too, stimulates these processes that may actually be mildly stressful or challenging or even toxic to our
Hmm.
bodies. And it's actually our physiology's response to those minor challenges that then allows us to receive like the benefits. Like exercise is a good example. We're placing a challenge on our body, and then our body
Hmm.
responds by becoming stronger, to that challenge. Same with like heat shock proteins, like in the sauna. That's exactly what's going on.
Hmm.
And also with even like antioxidants in blueberries and kale and things like that. It's funny because we think of them as like you know, being these antioxidant molecules that are neutralizing, free radical compounds and keeping us from aging. But actually, it's a bit of the opposite, where things in blueberries, for example, are minorly toxic. Plants have evolved them to try and deter people eating them. And then humans and other animals have evolved one step above to be able to tolerate these minorly toxic compounds in the fruits, and then
Hmm.
actually respond by upregulating things like glutathione or superoxide dismutase. Anyways, I digressed
Hmm.
off of a tangent a little bit, but yeah, just like a lot of what you shared really kind of prompted some noodling in my brain about, how Kambo might fit into some of these concepts based on its
Hmm.
mix of these different features that seem to be somewhat rare from a vitalist perspective in the natural world.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. There's so many juicy things that come through that. I mean, first, I'm starting to dabble in the antioxidant potential for certain peptides, which has been a whole new just like, oh my gosh, like I see the antioxidant conversation as a really big piece of what we scientifically can point towards the vital force, right? Like these electrons and charges that are balancing in most cases cellular forces and cellular energy so that it can be utilized or removed or metabolized. So I'm curious if since combo we're still kind of figuring out how it's working on a detox pathway. I'm curious if there's maybe a little something there. And also this notion of right like the putting ourselves through I think a word I've heard like you stress eu stress like you stress is sort of like positive stress that's actually provoking cells like you described into a healthier state. And for me that's what I would still say is a vitalistic action that we call vital stimulant, right? Like typically in vitalism, we've called herbs and agents, molecules, compounds that stimulate energy without draining the energetic force, a vital stimulant. And maybe we can get in a little bit to sort of the line between when combo can exhaust and when combo can really like produce and support a lot more energy. But I really see combo as this kind of vital stimulant because it's through all of its sophistications and different energetics and expressions, it's pushing in most cases energy towards health, right? It's correcting. We've seen so many crazy things like bringing entire endocrine function back into balance and shifting tissue states back into balance and, correcting things that maybe people didn't even fully understand they were navigating or did. And so that for me is like nodding towards through those ordeals and through these what seem on the outside as dramatic things, like it's moving the vital force into a really good direction. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have thought a bit about like similar to the blueberries, you eat them and then they
Hmm.
stimulate um, responses in like upregulation of antioxidant production, things like that. Like, I wouldn't be
Hmm.
surprised if there's something similar happening with Kambo where, on an epigenetic level, there's some sort of upregulation of beneficial processes in the biology
Hmm.
that are ultimately changing the terrain of that person's physiology, like system wide. But
Yeah.
we need research to see if that's true. But um,
Yes.
yeah, I'm curious, as someone who's equipped with thinking about Kambo through this perspective, through this framework, how does
Uh-huh.
that change how you approach working with Kambo? Like, how does that bleed
Uh-huh.
into like your preparation, your administration, your aftercare, how you work with this medicine at all?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I think beyond I think first of all, again, that framework is a really big piece of it. So, we didn't really touch quite yet on the actions piece, except just to, I defined what that is. But to give some kind of specific examples, that's been really supportive in leading into then how am I supporting before combos applied, during combo application process, and after, right? Based on, oh, this is something else that you're saying a second ago, Caitlin, was that like each person has a unique makeup, right? Like each person's constitution is different. Each person's metabolic pathways are different. Each person's detox pathways they have, like, we all have these different makeups, and peptides are interacting within those makeups, and the vital force of the combo peptides is energetically interacting with that person's constitution. So naturally, just like when you give an herb to a person with a warm constitution and same herb to a person with a cold constitution, you'll observe different effects, right? So that's definitely a piece that vitalism is allowing me to apply to how I'm working with combo and addressing the type of care each individual person might need. And so, when I think about actions as a place to bring in understanding of what's happening to the tissues and the body, and then how does that advise how I'm handling a person that's going through that, I think about fun definitions like, what does combo do? Okay, combo's a cholagogue or cholagogue. I probably said that wrong because it's Latin. Cholagogue, right? So it's like this word that actually just means stimulates bile, right? Like, oh, the bile purge on combo. We love and don't love it, right? It's like so bitter, right? And bile is an incredible vital substance that our body's creating in our livers, that's stored in the gallbladder. And it seems like by some effect, the peptides are literally dumping bile into the stomach, which we know not only is digesting fats, but it's also metabolizing and helping with detox and elimination of fat-soluble toxins like hormone byproducts and heavy metals and fat-soluble, nutrients and things in excess, and other mycotoxins. Like it has this function. So we have a word, cholagogue, that says makes bile, and we can use that to be like, okay, so that means it's working in the hepatobiliary system, right? We don't have to know exactly the mechanism of action, but we know something's happening there. So how am I making sure that in a person's prep work or in my screening system that I'm paying attention to that system, right? So, I mean, I had a few other fun words to share, like, diaphoretic, when all of a sudden you're perspiring and you feel like you're cool and something's provoking that, right? Might work through the nervous system, might work through the endocannabinoid system. There might be these methods that the peptides are metabolizing and interacting with that are causing that effect. So I'd call that diaphoretic, or salivating, sialagogue, or purgative, cathartic, right? Causing peristalsis, going one way or the other, causing tissues to actually undulate and move things, and meanwhile dumping bile and probably chyme and stomach acid and like all this stuff into different digestive tissues with that peristaltic action that's leading to a purge. So we have these terms within vitalistic actions that we can use to, again, kind of orient. And one in particular that I think is worth really sharing here that people may not be familiar with, that's really rooted in vitalism, that informs how I work with this, how I talk about combo, how I'm supporting people through it, is alterative or alterative, right? It's spelled like alternative without the N. And I know this because every time I type it, even though it's a word that was created a long time ago, Google doesn't like it, Grammarly doesn't like it. It wants it to be alternative. It's alterative, right? And that word is saying an agent that actually alters the chemical composite of blood and interstitial fluids, right? It's something that's actually working in a sophisticated mechanism with the vital force of detox systems like the skin, the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatics, the capillary system, like working with all these complex systems to clean the fluids that are responsible for maintaining the health and integrity and cleanliness of the cells, right? So like in the time this word was created with the physiomedicalists, they were describing this bad blood phenomenon because they aligned a lot with the humoral, expression of health. And so bad blood showed up as like dark circles in the eyes, yellow or pale skin, acne, blemishes, sluggishness, constipation, like, varicose veins, laxity in the veins, like these sort of depressive affect, like this kind of stuff that was directly related to buildup of toxicity, lymphatic function compromised, circulatory system like liver, kidneys, all these things compromised. And so lo and behold, when you take burdock, red clover, all of these things, they're like literally working with these systems to not only clean and detox, but eliminate, metabolize, and improve function, restore function to the tissues. That's a piece of it, right? So generally, the rub where I might get challenged by Vitalists is that alteratives are not typically really strong, pushy agents, right? But I would say, despite the drama, despite the direct impact on tissue, Kambo continues to work after the application piece. And we see that, especially with routine sittings and done in sequence. And I've seen that in my own life where it takes time for these detox pathways to open and return to health. So if we know that Kambo can do that and we're prepared to support before, during, and after, then suddenly we can start to understand a cool word like alternative and how it's combining tissue states and stuff, and start to know a little bit more about what is this doing and how can we work with it. So that's been kind of the action piece. And then as a vitalist, right, I'm trained in physiology, I'm trained in screening, I'm trained in looking at systems. So my screening form is evaluating tissue states that are being impacted by Kambo, right? So this is so much a part of vitalism for me because I'm able to ask good questions that can unveil things that need to come up in an intro call. Like my system is I start with screening and then we do an intro call because that saves so much time. And then I can really see and ask better questions. So if someone says, I have lots of allergies, I can start to be like, because of my vitalist training, be like, oh shoot, is that potentially indicating mast cell activation syndrome? Are they having chronic inflammation? Are they having like hyperreaction to proteins and stuff? Do I need to kind of understand how that could impact the way that I either serve Kambo or choose not to, or support them with aftercare? And I'm able to ask, questions about theoretical or specific systems that take an impact from Kambo, right? Like we talk a lot about how the peptides are inherently really safe. That they're so magical. Like they're these tiny chains and no folds, and like they just metabolize. And it's just the impact that the metabolic pathway has. You got to pay attention to the tissues and understand what could potentially cause some safety concerns. So for me, my vitalism background was a really natural scaffolding to sort of step in with Kambo to, because it was giving me this kind of energetic and action understanding. It was giving me an ability to screen and ask better questions. And it was giving me an ability to really advise on dieta or prep work, instead of just giving this, like, my training program gave me this ayahuasca diet to give you, but actually be like, what do you need to support the liver, the bile production, your energy, your nervous system, your endocrine function? Is this person at the end of, festival tour all summer sucking down nitrous and doing lots of drugs and wants Kambo to purge, and like their state of health is different than someone else who might come to Kambo looking for it to stack up towards bigger life changes or clearing of energy and bringing things back into balance? So I feel like Kambo's given me an ability to be like, how can I guide this person on, you might need some, or vitalism's given me this ability to be like, you might need to sweep before you mop. You might need to take some NAC or some milk thistle to support your liver, and like drink some water, and like, does this person report that they eat a lot of fast food? Like maybe they need to take a little more time with nutrient dense, simple, restorative, tonic broths and roasted vegetables and things leading up to a ceremony to really prime their body for receiving Kambo. So some of these things were kind of already there within my kind of Kambo awareness, but it was really suddenly this opportunity to be like, okay, I have all these systems that I can navigate, and so how can I be a better practitioner and facilitator and ensure that the person has a safe and rewarding experience.
I so appreciate that, especially the individualism that um, this allows you to bring to each client. I think that's a massive problem in allopathic medicine. And even in the Kambo world, as a teacher, I often encounter a lot of people that just want the answer. They just want the
Hmm.
protocol. They're like, well, what about for this disease? Or, how many points do you do for this? And it's like the bane of my existence. I'm like, well, it depends. I mean, anyone who's ever asked me a question knows that I always start with, well, it depends.
Yeah.
Um, and, a big part of like my training programs, I am very much emphasizing critical thinking skills, which
Hmm.
sometimes people don't like. They just want the recipe. But the truth is, you can't simplify things like that. And I love that you're taking this approach, not only with the Kambo itself, but like with their entire constitution, because all of that
Hmm.
does radically influence what that person needs and how they need to be handled,
Hmm.
and what type of experience is going to serve them best. And that's a lot of nuance that most practitioners are missing, because they're like, well, my teacher told me if they have this disease, we put it here and this many points, which is just like a blatant um,
Hmm.
bastardization of any sort of like nuance or spectrum of evaluating anything, in my opinion. So, anyways, I'm just thanking you for your service of making part of your practice and sharing that possibility for others to do the same. You mentioned sweeping before you mop. I would love to ask you more about what that means and why is that important?
Yeah, thank you. That was something I don't even know when or exactly how I came up with that, but it was also kind of stimulated by this, my vitalistic mentor and elder kind of, not refuting or rejecting what I was saying, but just kind of being like, huh, that doesn't, necessarily I think make sense with combo. So I was like, well, what's the rub, right? Part of what I was learning and cluing into was like, look at like I'm going to go a little bit on a tangent, but our approach to detox culturally, especially in the global north, is just, it could be better. Like, I am not saying that there aren't times and places that we need extra support detox. I mean, even when I used to teach detox and hepatic systems at the herb school, I would say, I mean, yeah, we're in an environment where there's an enormous amount more of toxicity than we had for millions of years, right? So, like, yes, our bodies evolved as sophisticated mechanisms, and in optimal health, they generally do a pretty good job of detoxing those things. And depending on lifestyle and environmental factors, there's definitely a need for support. I'm not saying that, but there's this kind of almost like puritanical, like I'm dirty and I need to like purge like mindset that I think is different than what's needing a strong reset release, right? That's opening the space for what comes next. And in preparation for that release, do I have enough vital reserve, right? And are my systems prepared to handle the acuteness of the experience? And so that's where this kind of sweep before you mop came from. Like, as a vitalist, we focus a lot on the sweeping, right? If sweeping is gentle therapeutics and mopping is heroic doses of things, sweeping is like your broths, your rest. Oh my God, we sometimes joke that us vitalists are kind of boring, like be a boring herbalist. Like, a person comes to us to talk through health things, and the first things we're telling them is like, improve your sleep hygiene, and we can coach you through that. Improve your hydration, we can coach you through that. Get some basic nutrient dense, simple things you can access and start making these decisions that are, again, building scaffolding of a vital lifestyle. Things that are supporting digestive function, allowing you to assimilate nutrients, things that are supporting proper elimination and metabolization without needing to take like cathartic laxatives and things all the time. Like just these things that aren't still getting out of being a human or like having space for enjoying your life, but are just making these decisions that are priming a body for receiving this like ancient technology that we call Kambo that has these really dramatic effects. So I think that just kind of became a way to start tying together my vitalism understanding with a very heroic folk medicine like Kambo, to kind of build a bigger container where I'm able to coach and inspire my clients to really prepare adequately depending on where they're at, really know what type of care again that they have during, really know how to advise them after, and really focus on less on the detoxing piece and more on the, okay, so what comes next? Like, what are you then filling in that space with? So, yeah, those are some things that come up.
I love that. I'll just like share personally, I have really discovered over the last year and a half, 2 years, the importance of slow, consistent, gradual detoxification over these
Hmm.
glorified, explosive, cathartic, intense, perceptions of detoxification that I think have become really popularized. It's part of the like fast, cheap, easy model, the American Prime culture, or the Amazon Prime culture, as I like to call it, where people have just developed these expectations that they can undo years of toxic accumulation by showing up and doing one Kambo session or taking an herb for a week or something like that. And the reality is that detox systems are actually pretty fragile in a lot of people, and they require really like slow, consistent, regular support so that detox is kind of quietly happening in the background
Hmm.
24/7 while you sleep, while you
Hmm.
take your laxatives or whatever. And it's not always happening in these huge like monumental purgative moments or whatever. And I do think that Kambo does provide support with detox to some extent, but I think it's overemphasized for sure. And I think it's
Hmm.
people rely on it and lean on it as being the solution to what's ultimately needs to be corrected through consistent lifestyle choices and building that foundation, like you said, with proper
Hmm.
nutrition, hydration, sleep hygiene, stress support, things like that. I
Hmm.
want to kind of go back to something that you brought up about the hepatobilic um, system,
Hmm.
liver, gallbladder, bile, all those
Hmm.
things. Um, because, knowing that a lot of toxins do get conjugated in the bile, and that is a body's mechanism of detoxing a lot of different things through this kind of like slow drip of the bile into the intestines and then being eliminated through bowel movements, but also then
Hmm.
being reabsorbed at times, which seems a bit inefficient, but maybe there's some brilliance behind it that I don't understand
Hmm.
yet. So I've kind of noodled on this question about, where does Kambo and other purgatives fit into the equation? Do they actually
Hmm.
support bile flow and detoxification because they are removing large amounts of bile that may contain different toxins that are, dissolved in them? Um, at the same time, like you said, bile is a really precious representation of life force. It's a very energetically expensive material for the body to make. It requires a lot of, choline and rich nutrients to generate. And I
Hmm.
think this is in part why doing purgatives, especially bile rich ones like Kambo, can be depleting and can actually drain someone's vital force over long term if they're regularly having these purgative bile releasing experiences. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about the fact that bile is being released and vomited and eliminated, and whether that has benefits, drawbacks. What's your thoughts?
Sure. Oh, I love this conversation so much because yeah, this whole like I love when you said that detox is such a complicated system. Like we have very clearly defined, even if we have yet to discover more about it, right? We don't know everything, but pretty clearly defined understanding of the systems of detox in the liver. And we also understand a lot about how the cells are making bile, like you said, out of different nutrient cofactors like choline. There's bile salts, right? Like we need cholesterol, right? Like cholesterol gets vilified, but like we actually need it for bile production. That's why people on statins like have depreciated bile and then they don't absorb fats and it causes health complications. So it's like we have all these nutrients that go into making it. And so I love your question about what happens if we're like squeezing it out. Is that a good thing? Can that be draining? And for me, that goes back to that person's like vital reserves to begin with, right? A person that's approaching the combo altar, these types of purgative bile oriented medicines, like that is not adequately hydrated in general, right? You need water to make bile. like like you need water to make a lot of things, but you need it to make bile. So if they're not hydrated, if their digestion function is not good, maybe they're not producing enough stomach acid, right? If there's certain conditions that can impact that system and its function, like I imagine that it would lead to more of a taxing effect on the system, right? Because if it is in fact sort of emptying the gallbladder, which it kind of seems to be doing, it's somehow emptying the gallbladder, and there's only, what did I used to say, like a teaspoon. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say there's only like a couple teaspoons equivalent, or like a tablespoon of bile in the gallbladder at any time. So that would kind of make sense for about how much field like is coming up. And so it seems like it really is kind of squeezing out a lot of this bile. So I think in the moment, to answer your question about is it helpful, it seems to be. I was a little skeptical at first, but once I started seeing like clear evidence, I wasn't lab testing it, but clear evidence of microplastics, heavy metals, like different visible colors and things that were beyond the color of bile that would have a real like specific quantifiable substance to it. Once I started seeing that coming out more, I was like, okay, interesting. Bile is designed to not go up, it's designed to really go down, and it's really caustic. So in terms of concerns, I'm also thinking about how am I supporting the esophagus with water, with the banana gruel, or with tea afterwards. But yeah, I think that's an important question in general, Caitlin, is where's that line between a system being like potentially burnt out by the effects of something like combo, or being really supported? And I think it just is always going to come down to, like you said, it depends. It depends on that person's, kind of health going into it. And it depends on, quite frankly, what they're willing to commit to afterwards. Right? There's that kind of danger we've probably seen with the clients that are like, combo is just the thing that does it. And I'm like, well, it's a huge catalyst, but again, you like same with herbalism clients and nutrition clients that I even fired because they just weren't yet ready to really like meet and start, putting these things into practice. I feel like some of the challenges with working with combo is often people are coming to it as this kind of, like you said, like fix all. And so how am I, yeah, just advising them to really build more of like a holistic approach before, during, and after that has longevity, right? And that involves supporting these systems. I'm trying to think if precious system, life force. Yeah, I mean, even thinking about minerals, kind of on that same topic, right? You've taught classes on this. You've trained so many people, which you know, it was funny because I was trained to avoid salt before combo because of ayahuasca dieta, and then even though I had a background in physiology and like understood hyponatremia, like I just didn't think about it, right? Like I was just, okay, this is the system we work with. And then I take your class, I'm like, I felt kind of dumb because I'm like, oh, it's right there. Like literally just physiology. Like if you are depleting massive amounts of electrolytes and flooding the cells with too much water and minus the electrolytes, that causes really serious side effects. So even knowing things like that, like minerals are being depleted from our food. So yeah, I'm asking my clients to supplement with electrolytes, leading in and spring water as much as possible, and sea vegetables and mineral dense things, so that they're coming with more of a vital reserve, which is reducing safety concerns around mineral depletion. So kind of another example of, if a person's coming to me like depleted, dehydrated, right? That's someone that is probably going to be a riskier situation to serve, and is going to probably have a lot more side effects and complications after that, that need special, even maybe IV nurse intervention care. So I think those are all the thoughts that come up for me around that question. Is like, yeah, when we see this like stimulating effect, and vitalism teaches us, like, when stimulating herbs are constantly, or agents are stimulating tissues, pay attention to that, because in the presence of the vital reserve and the vital force of that person, too much of that has the potential to exhaust it further, you know?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why it's so important to be able to evaluate people ahead of time and get an idea of how resourced they truly are, because someone who's depleted is not going to be able to respond physiologically the same as someone who, is quite vital by default. Um,
Hmm.
and, at the extreme end, that could turn into a medical emergency. But even at the less extreme end, it just means that that person's not going to be supported in detoxing effectively, or
Hmm.
being able to move towards health and wholeness, because their body doesn't have the resources to facilitate that. Even something as simple as sodium and potassium, and these electrolytes that we kind of just think, oh, they keep people from getting hyponatremia and dying. Yes, and they do so much more. They actually support the system in a lot of ways. And if someone is
Right.
kind of on the low end of those to begin with, forget the fact that they might have increased risk of electrolyte disturbance, which is a problem, but they're also just not going to have much vital energy, like you said, to facilitate executing all these complex functions in their physiology, including detoxification and nervous
Hmm.
system recruitment and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that vitalism really preaches is that the vital force relies on well assimilated nutrients to function, right? It's an immaterial force, but it's relying on these nutrients. This is for me where this bridging between the physical and the energetic happens, where I see, like, combo bridges, physical and energetic. I see this idea of the vital force assimilating nutrients, largely minerals, especially vitamins and minerals, but this is the whole, like, we're made out of star stuff, right? Our blood and our nervous system are literally relying on minerals working correctly in a highly polar water based solution, so that our body is communicating effectively with each other. And those things are so fundamental to health, because our bones, our blood, our immune systems, our bodies, like our enzyme functions, all of these things rely on the energy found in these minerals that are coming from space and from the earth upwards, through the plants, through the animals, through the things that we consume. And so those are the things for optimal health. So as a vitalist, again, like, if you can't assimilate nutrients, why? Do you have leaky gut? Do you have compromised liver? Blah blah blah. And listen, like, when it comes to assessing depleted and vital, like, I know there's many people are combo curious, or wellness folks and combo practitioners and herbalists and different people that are listening, but not everyone that walks with combo needs to necessarily have this type of framework. I think a energetic and physiological framework is absolutely important and helpful. But in terms of like screening people, like, a lot of this again is just observational, right? Like, when you're showing up with a client, or this why I do video or in-person intro calls, is like, just like, look at the person. I would hope, if you're a combo practitioner and you're working within health, that you'd be able to visibly see when a person looks of health and vital or not, right?
Yeah.
And people that do this work often see it more clearly. So this is what I'm talking about, is like, we're using our observational skills, and then whatever framework works, so that we can then understand how to approach. And if we want to take it to the next level and study autoimmune and Lyme and mold, and that awesome class that I took from you on how to work with like sensitive populations that might have compromised foundational health and might be doing a lot of stuff and still being inflamed and having lax tissues and stuff that need to be handled differently. So how can we, dance within these different frameworks to, again, just like support each individual person where they're at, or say, hey, I don't think Kambo is the right option for you.
Yeah.
I have said that to people.
Yeah, so the TLDR is like, if you don't have any sophisticated vitalism background, that's okay. Deep
Hmm.
listening and discernment are really what need to be called in. I think for everybody, I
Hmm.
think every practitioner should already be doing those things.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? Like that's part of the being in full presence. Like we talk, I have this concept that I know some folks are familiar with of the hollow bone, or like for me, that's about hollowing out like my stuff, right? Because combo practice is so visceral. Like I love it so much more than clinical herbalism because you're like in it with the people, and there's so much trust and just like this incredible container that I really honor and value. And so you're being in full presence with people in the combo experience. You're trying to hollow out your stuff. Be like, if your stuff comes up when you're in the process with people, right? I'm really working and really learn to like move that out of the way. So I'm talking full presence to a person's process, right? When I'm screening a person, really being present with what am I reading? Really screening them, right? I'm not just like, okay, they didn't click this, they didn't click this. Like I'm reading between the lines. Like I put the screening form together. So like what is it telling me? Right? Like how am I being in full presence in that intro call? How do they hold themselves? How do they look? How do their eyes look? Right? What are the words that they're using to describe their health or their reason for wanting to sit with combo or what they're looking for support through? And then when I'm serving them, right, full presence. I'm often going to people's homes as well, which I really honor. And so making home calls and like being in full presence with where they're living, right? What an honor and blessing it is to be welcomed into people's homes, and what much trust that requires. So all of this for me is feeding into a vitalistic approach that's like, how am I understanding physiology, energetics, all these systems, and then what am I seeing, and how is it informing me about a person's picture of health? And how many times, Caitlin, have we seen clients come in that, are navigating some heavy stuff, right? And then, wow, the transformation that can happen after combo in many cases, you see that visibly. I know myself, like being healed of this incredible emotional trauma and this deep psychological wound that I'd carried for a long time. Like when I had my transformation with combo that purged that out of me energetically, physically, it changed the way I was showing up in relationships. It changed the way I held my face. It changed the way I regulated my emotions. It was reflected by people that I looked different, right? So we see these things in different ways at different steps of the process. So how, as practitioners, are we being in full presence with that process and using that to clue us into better support for each unique person?
100%. Thank you for pioneering and leading others, inspiring others to do the same, because I think that those perspectives are just so valuable and important, and really should be the norm for people leading others in this type of work, in my opinion. So just want to say thank you for your
Thanks.
dedication to showing up in that way, for yourself and for other people, because whatever we do for ourselves also creates massive ripples in the space-time continuum, the quantum fabric of reality, etc. I want
Hmm.
to transition, since we're kind of touching on your personal experiences and how that's shaped how you do show up and move through the world, especially as an herbalist and a provider
Hmm.
of combo. A few years ago, you came down to the jungle with me, which was so much fun.
Hmm.
And I would just love to invite you to share more about, why did you go on that journey? What happened for you on that journey? And how has that
Hmm.
influenced influenced your practice and where you're at now with some of the things that you're working on.
Thank you. Yeah, oh my gosh, that trip was life-changing, as you know, and I'm just so grateful. You know, was grateful that I received your newsletter. I took that class, and then I think I reached out after the class, said, "How'd you get to the jungle? I want to go." And you're like, "Well, I'm putting this inaugural trip together." And for me, that compulsion started at a young age. Like, you know, there's this adorable photo I remember as a kid of like wearing a Davy Crockett like hat and reading some adventure book with my dad, and just like eventually being really inspired by the jungles of South America, and learning more about the medicines and the people, and then of course having my heart broken by just reading about all of the resulting impacts of transnational greed and extractive systems of oppression and capitalism that are leading to extreme poverty and deforestation and animal trade and cartels and all of the like unsavory things that go on in South America in these spaces. So for me, when I started working with Kambo and I was initiated and had my healing transformation, I got the message that that meant I was now in a deep relationship with a living being that comes from a very specific biodiverse region. And as an herbalist and a vitalist who grows most of my own herbs and medicine and has worked in botanical wellness for many years, like the notion of the people and the ecologies that are behind each thing that's people are using or giving or making money off of, like those are equally important to understand. And so with something really precious that in the sense that it only comes from a specific bioregion in the world, that's nestled in a problematic, eco and social backdrop. It was important for me, if I was going to carry this, that I had access to understanding the frog, its environment, and hearing about it from the people that have been caretaking it for a long time. Right. So that's like all of that really went into compelling me. Like, I need to know where this comes from. I also started realizing some of the training organization that I didn't know you yet, so I did a different one. I that and some others, I just felt like they were giving these what I call like Boulder Babe explanations, like the pan-Indian, stories and the words to use, and then everyone just copies and pastes that and puts that on their Kambo website. And like, no shade, we all have to start somewhere. Certainly, that can be helpful in some ways, but I was determined to get. I mean, you remember when I was there, I was like asking so many questions, like ready with my questions, and just like so many questions that I wanted to know, get to the bottom of like, where are these things coming from? Like, where are these stories? Where are these understandings coming from? And then, like, what am I doing to build actual reciprocal relationships if I'm going to continue to offer this in my communities? So yeah, that was a big thing that compelled me.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. And it's a big part of why I think it's important for practitioners to go to the jungle, because there's so much perspective missing by just operating in the Western lens of how Kambo is being used. And
Hmm.
that's not to put anyone down for not having gone to the jungle. I don't think that um, it means someone can't be a good quality practitioner or have a relationship to the medicine. But I think in order to really, deepen the connection and get the full picture of who Kambo is, and who has been working with it and where it comes from and what it's all about, you just can't understand those things until you're there living it, witnessing it, touching it, and connecting with it in person, including, like you said,
Hmm.
the people that have stewarded these deep relationships for hundreds of years with this medicine. So I think it's something that every practitioner should do in their life if they take themselves seriously as a carrier of that wisdom. Um, yeah, and I know that Johnny Java, one of our teachers, had a big impact on you as well. And I would love to hear you share more about what your experience was like working with him and connecting with his family and how that may have
Hmm.
impacted you.
Yes. Oh my gosh, what a legend. I'm just so grateful that that meeting and interaction took place. So Johnny Java, he was an integrative practitioner living along the Napo River in Peru. And part of our jungle trip was to travel, by, let's see, including the flights to get there, was it two planes, I think two or three boats, a moto taxi ride, and several mile hike to get to his property along the Napo River in Peru. And so we spent time with their family, and he's from Quichua and Matisse lineage. And he also spent a significant portion of his life living with the Matses in some of their traditional territories. And he's also one in a continuation of multiple generations of, maestros or pajes or medicine men in his family lineage. And what really stood out to me was he was literally the living, breathing embodiment and extension of the Napo River. And interesting to note, his predominant lineage is Quichua, and they primarily live along the Napo River, spanning in Ecuador, which starts in the Andean mountains of Ecuador and eventually deltas with the Amazon and the Loreto region, where this healing center and nature reserve is located. So Johnny stood out to me too because I'll be honest, when I first learned how to like serve combo, and it felt very like neo shamanic, and as we've talked about, like it's not historically a shamanic medicine. It's like a hunting magic ritual and comes from very different worldviews. So like this neo shamanic approach was a little like, okay, like is this really, like the way that I was taught with prayer and all this stuff, they're like it was from the specific group, and then when I went and sat with the matzes, it was like not that way. So so then when I sat with Johnny, I was like, holy cow, like this man, first of all, he welcomed us warmly with a big smile. He's just so jovial, so easy to talk to, so comfortable to be around, this incredible smile, charismatic energy. And I remember when we first got to his property, he was just like, welcome, brothers, and in Spanish, welcome, brothers and sisters. The spirit of Pachamama and Kambo has brought us together. Like, you're here with me now. Ask me as many questions as you want, and make yourselves comfortable, something to that effect. And then we got to experience the way that he carried medicine, which was integrative, right? Like he had his own lineage, he had Matsest inspiration, and he knew a lot about chakra systems. He knew a lot about Western physiology. He was screening people. He was treating thousands of people. He was understanding tissue states and energetics and when to be careful and when to be stronger, when to be lighter. And he worked with this kind of like vitalistic approach, right? Like I remember we were all a little cocky. Like we just sat with the matzes. Yeah, I just took 4 points. Like, oh, Johnny only serves one or two. We heard we're gonna microdose, and then it was like combo was like hold my tamishi vine. Like one small point with this incredible person that has we got to see that deep love and reverence for the medicine, his incredible amount of knowledge and wisdom, and the way that he moved energy, worked with the elements, and worked with little small amounts that he layered on and took off. And he was in complete full presence of support before, during, and after, prayerfully, working with ceremonial objects. I mean, it blew my mind. And not to mention his incredible wife Uli and their children, and just like their siblings, and everyone that just welcomed us, where even despite being forced into these systems in Peru of poverty and issues with government and bureaucracy and all of these things, like the generosity, the foundational affirmation that we're all from the same human family, and the willingness to share under the understanding and trust that there is reciprocal relationships of support being built, like that transformed everything. And then like to receive combo and see like a tiny little point, and to be purging out of both ends and seeing visions in my mind's eye very clearly of how I still had yet to clean up my life and really align to a lifestyle that was working in harmony with these different natural systems. So all of that really shaped me. And when it's in the backdrop of seeing the I remember when we were on the boat to Johnny's, and like you come around that corner on the Amazon and there's all the skyscraper tall trees just stacked up, ready for the next bidder. And you see the smoke rising from the jungle, and you see the, dry season, like lack of access to clean water, and just all of these things that are like as a result of extractive technologies. And now here I am in these incredible people's home that feel like siblings from other parents that are welcoming me and sharing me with these things and waking me up and giving me this message that I want to bring into the way that I hold my own ceremonies. So yeah, really didn't know what to expect with that part of the trip, and it really transformed a lot for me and created lifelong friendships.
Yeah, what a special family they are. I feel so grateful to know them, and lucky to continue being in relationship with his wife and his children. And yeah, he was a very special person that instantly created safety and trust and expansion in every person that he interacted with. And yeah, he's truly an inspiration in that way.
Hmm.
I want to ask about, your company, Earth Medicine
Hmm.
Apparel Company, and like connecting the origin story of that and the mission of it, and just
Hmm.
yeah, what you guys do.
Thank you. Yeah, you know what? I've been thinking about starting a graphic apparel company for a long time because I studied printmaking in college. And I spent the last several years learning business by working mid-level roles. And then I started really desiring to get back. I'd focused so much on herbalism, on formulating, on doing all these things. I was starting to think, like, really desire getting back to my creativity and my art and my storytelling. So I'm flying back from the Amazon. Johnny still hasn't passed yet. I'm still just like, what the heck did I just experience? That was the most difficult, challenging, and rewarding experience I've yet had in my life. And so I started thinking about, like, okay, how's graphic art able to be like medicine? How is it able to share stories about biodiverse ecosystems and spaces where the artwork itself is drawing people on a platform of shared values and resources, and then connecting them to people and places that are behind the art? And then what if the art was, in this case, screen printed with an eco-friendly water-based ink on garments that are sourced within my corporate social responsibility framework, so that each step of our supply, or what I call our value chain, is creating equitable support across every step, so that when someone comes to purchase a product from us, then that purchase has gone towards ensuring, right, like water safe dyes, no phthalates or PVC, equitable pay, long life cycle, and a story that's connecting back to a specific impact campaign. So I started coming up with this idea on, like, how do I kind of share herbalism as art? And then it became this whole, like, oh, I have more of a storytelling platform and a amplification platform that's utilizing art and these different kind of things to create Earth Medicine Apparel Company. So around the time I started learning Adobe Illustrator, I have a background in studio art. So, I poo-pooed digital art for a long time, and then realized, I really want to learn Adobe Illustrator. So I started learning this stuff. And then around that time, we found out, you had let us know that Johnny had passed really suddenly, in his sleep at 56 years old. Oh my God. I was like feeling that collective grief with knowing how much that man left an impact and how many more people he impacted that don't even know his name. And I started wondering, because I'm over here, like, a white guy from the north that really cares a lot about the kinship and the stories, and centering communities, and wondering how can I achieve that in a way that's decolonial and equitable and responsible. So I felt like, could and I felt personally responsible because of the way that he changed my life, to really take up um, the responsibility of sharing his story, right? Like, I really do. I'm still kind of piecing together the stories. I know you've been working on this too, but we know that he was friends with Peter Gorman. We know that, he's mentioned in the Gratitudes in Peter Gorman's book. and we know that he was potentially influential, and because of that relationship, in disseminating this kind of integrative approach to holding combos. So I have a working theory that he is incredibly influential to the way that many people are serving combo today. So he's dead now, right? That wisdom keeper is gone, and people are still making money off of this stuff, and certainly not all of them are sourcing from this place. But I would argue that almost all of them are actually can thank this person. So it felt like a responsibility to create a testament to his life, and see how I could work it into a business model that is centering the stories and like creating networks of support. So sent a letter with you to Uli, and some time had passed, of course, being really sensitive to the enormous amount of grief. And I wasn't sure if she'd reply, and she did. She sent me this beautiful, like I was crying, like listening to it. And I'm still working on Spanish fluency, so my friend's there with me helping, and I'm like crying and listening to her response. And she's just like, "We love you so much. Like, we see you as a little brother. Like, thank you so much for caring about our family. Thank you so much for wanting to share the story of my husband. Like, we trust you, blah, blah, blah." So we started this conversation, and then I got on the phone with her in a video call and just said like, "Hey, like, part of this is I want you to tell me what's a project that I can do that has a numerical value that we can support you with, especially I have all this potential I see, but like I'm not there, and this isn't my project, it's theirs." And so she really surprised me, and just how she's like, I need to rebuild all the infrastructure. It was completely damaged by a tropical storm, with navigating the after effects of my husband's untimely death, right? We just have not been able to have the resources, and by rebuilding that stuff, we will be able to welcome guests, begin to work, and do all these things, and keep taking steps towards, you know, being able to do that work they want to do. Like, this is them saying, like, this is what we want. We want people to come here. We want to share our gifts. We want people to see the jungle, right? They don't want to do these odd jobs or get swept up to the crazy work opportunities that are down there. So she's like, "I need 15,000 soles, and that'll help." Done. So I created a portrait of Johnny. I'm wearing it right now as a shirt. I created a few other designs as well. And then I took a breath, and I sent them to Uli and her family, and waited to see if I would receive their approval. And again, their response was so heartwarming, and you could tell that it really touched them. So I started this brand with kind of my first impact campaign as being supporting this Quechua community in the face of losing an incredible wisdom keeper, and really big financial, support for the whole family and whole community, in order to maintain, right? Like knowing what I know about what's going on in the Amazon, like, best way to protect the Amazon is to support the people that live there. Like, jungle keepers is giving jobs to patrol the jungle to people that would otherwise be working as loggers, right? So like, if people have supportive livelihoods that are only compromised because of transnational greed and extractive technologies that our country and things kind of stimulate, then like, we have to protect those people to make sure that they maintain land titles and everything, right? So it becomes this bigger story on not just necessarily supporting one family, but encouraging people to be like, what can each of us do in service to Kambo and earth medicines to the people that are stewarding these lands, with what we can hold and what we're capacity, and how are we doing that in a way that's directed and guided by the community themselves? So we're attempting to do that. We've been able to, with community fundraising and product sales, actually exceed our goal. I know you got to go down and see it after things were rebuilt, and I'm looking forward to going back soon
Just seeing the
myself.
finishing touches when our group had arrived, yeah, it was spectacular. So I just want to say that I firsthand got to witness and benefit from this new lodging that had been built, and yeah, it definitely makes a difference having a place where they can receive people and groups like ours. So thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's been fun. It's been trying to still just really understand my brand positioning and stuff, but yeah, combining thoughtful sourcing with original art and impact campaigns is kind of now where I'm applying a lot of, I say my life's work is at the intersection of creative and visual arts, and healing arts. So that's kind of my jam right now.
I love it, and I love how you found a way to bring in reciprocity initiatives with your passion for creating art, creating awareness, and creating conscious business frameworks that I think the rest of the world should also follow. I'm curious, just what your thoughts and feelings are about reciprocity and how other people should be engaging or can be engaging with reciprocity in their practices or their decisions, their buying choices, etc.
So you're asking about reciprocity, and that's been something that I'm really paying attention to, not just with my apparel company, but with my Kambo practice. And so reciprocity to me is that there's networks of mutual aid and support and uplifting that are being generated in all relationships when working with earth medicines. And reciprocity can look like, right, like you said, not everyone has access to be able to necessarily go to the jungle. So like, are there other ways that we can be reciprocal? But in some ways, right, like reciprocity is knowing the exact people that are involved with the medicine's origin and paying respects and homage back to them, right? So it looks like in combo practice, sourcing directly from communities and knowing where those communities are. In my own practice, I also give a percentage back directly to communities and organizations that are uplifting Indigenous sovereignty and maintaining protections for Amazonian, in a community oriented way, Amazonian territories. And also, it's about understanding the language, the words. Like for me, reciprocity is when the Matse said, just use our words, right? Like call it a kate, or understand what we mean when we say panema. And if you're gonna show our pictures and talk about warrior medicine and talk about Matses medicine, then like understand what you're talking about, right? Like call these people in by name. I've had the enormous pleasure of receiving medicine from Don Lucho, from Joaquin, from Johnny Java, and like honoring and calling those people in. These are real people that have this wisdom that we're seeking, and then we're seeking to bring into our communities, right? So reciprocity is tantamount because it's the people that are caretaking these medicines, whether it's chamomile or whether it's combo, right, are often living in poverty and in systems of oppression because of this backdrop that I've named, right? So then it becomes a responsibility of the practitioner in relationship with these peoples and these medicines to be giving back to them in some way. And that could even look like, if you're charging 200 or something for a session and this is a regular thing for you, like, can you give a percentage of that back to Akate Rainforest or Jungle Keepers or to an organization that you're working with? Or can you honor the stories, right? Like what I appreciate about you, Caitlin, is you tell the whole story that as you know it, and you're seeking the whole story. And that's a misgiving I have when it comes to reciprocity with so many people, is like, oh, here's the story of Kampu, but they don't understand where it comes from, right? And you've really helped kind of bring some of that awareness into understanding. But I feel like people will show Matses pictures and talk about warrior medicine, but they're not telling the story about people that are on the front line of defense against cartels and corrupt governments, loggers and miners, and certainly have their own stuff. There's darkness in all these places. I'm not going to paint any group as, the glorified, figures or whatever, but I guess what I'm saying is I think part of reciprocity is being honest with the whole story about the communities that are being impacted, right? Like, yes, there's incredible Indigenous people that are born of and lived and have masterfully survived the jungle for generations are the ones that are caretaking this medicine. And there's very real issues that they're dealing with that we need to be able to talk about. We have to. We have to be able to talk about it. We have to be able to talk about it because we have to be able as facilitators and practitioners to hold that same weight of the horror and the beauty that the earth is holding that's expressed through all these medicines, right? And as a facilitator, whatever reciprocity you can do, it's so important. Like I say you're fluid bonding with a living being when you take Kambo, because you're literally taking its skin secretions into your surface blisters and getting into your capillaries and your lymphatics. And that stuff is made because they ate bugs that nursed on the nectar of the flowers of the trees and the plants that are thriving in the minerals and the energetics of the whole ecosystem. So that medicine only exists because of that whole ecosystem. And then it's nestled in this bigger social structure with very real things. So to me, it becomes this responsibility to not bypass that stuff. And so it's been kind of a mission of mine, is like, how do we hold that? Right? Because not everyone wants to hold that enormity. But sorry, if you're working with Amazonian medicines, and you're, especially if you're not natively of the regions where they come from, it is 100% your responsibility to do something in reciprocity, and to challenge yourself um, to really evaluate how you can continue to build on that, you know? So that's my
Yeah.
soapbox.
Ah, no, it's beautiful and just so wise and holistic in perspective. And yeah, like you said, like Kambo is a result of a complex interactive ecosystem. And if you are taking something out of that ecosystem, but you are not participating in it, and that can be metaphorically or energetically, um, then you are being extractive by definition. And so, yeah, with reciprocity, there has to be some sort of engagement at the least with that greater system, which involves the frogs, the people, the resources that sustain them, the environment
Hmm.
itself. There has to be some sort of engagement, or else you are existing on the outside and pulling energy out of that system without contributing. And that's just what allows things to be sustainable. And I think it is impossible to fully embody everything that Kambo is without having conversations about anthropology, um, social sociology, um, conservation, ecology.
Hmm.
Like all of these are foundational pieces to the picture of Kambo. You can't just look at Kambo through a medical lens or even a spiritual lens, because there's so many facets of it that are integrated and required to be in balance for this medicine to sustain, for it to continue to be available, for it to continue to be valuable, and for it to continue to be in relationship with all these other things that it's in relationship with in a healthy way. So, it might be biting off more than people want to chew, but the reality is you can't isolate the things that you want about Kambo without being honest and realistic about what it requires as a community, as a world,
Hmm.
to make sure that it's supported fully in all of these other complex intricacies that are innately part of a system that needs all of these things present to function, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely it does. And that ties again, like, again, I keep talking about like this concept of vitalism as even something that I didn't even know how to word for the longest time. Like I was a vitalist before I realized it. And that it again, it's relational, right? So it factors in all of these relationships. And I want to make sure too that I convey that my concept, as I understand it, of reciprocity is it's really distinguishing itself from charity, right? Because unfortunately, charity, even though there's a lot of positivity to that stuff, and I'm not here to knock charitable giving or anything, but charity tends to just continue to support longstanding systems of oppression and power, right?
Mm.
Reciprocity for me is again, it's always community oriented in their words, on their timeline, and sure, in collaboration, but that's again like being in service to the people, right? And so reciprocity is like when I see companies in botanical world, psychedelic world that again, even outside of Kambo, that like show indigenous people and they're like, oh, look at these, these indigenous people and how they live their life, and they give us their blessing and working with this medicine, all this stuff. And it's like, well, also, do they need, like, are they asking for help building a school or titling land or getting drinking stuff for like, 15,000 soles to rebuild 4 structures. That's like $5,000. I mean, that was doable for a small startup, and that's pretty attainable for a group of combo practitioners with a bunch of friends to raise, right? Like you've done it, Anura's done it, like different people we've seen that have galvanized their communities to like create resources that it's not just like, here you go, here's some stuff, but it's like these people have asked for this help, and so we're responding. We're like, okay, great, right? Like when we were with the Matzes, we sat in council. How can we help you? How can
Yeah.
we help you? That to me is so big, such a big piece of reciprocity, because it's centering the people and then being able to be like, here's how we can meet that, or get you the support that you need.
Yeah, it's like the teaching a man to fish versus giving them a fish. That's like the difference between reciprocity and charity, right? Is like one is
Totally.
still breeds reliance on outside
Uh-huh.
aid, whereas reciprocity, I think, more brings in principles of like, how do we empower this community? How do we ask them what's going to help them be resourced the most, whether that's
Hmm.
advancing education, making sure that children are learning Spanish so that they have opportunities in the world or whatever, um,
Hmm.
or buying them equipment that's going to help them do something, cook food, farm food for themselves, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
And it also means that you have to be willing to um, put their needs before your attachments to what you want to provide. And I think that can be hard for some people who are still very much romanticizing Indigenous culture, because the truth is they might want to they might want something that you don't want them to have, like Starlink or electricity or
No, right.
toilets or whatever. And even though some part of us might love the idea of them staying connected to nature and shitting in a hole, or not being distracted with YouTube videos or whatever it may be, they're people and they have desires, and the world is modernizing and they don't want to get left behind. And who can blame them,
Right.
And who am I as a donor or whatever, a support, to tell them that they can't have those things because I want their culture to persist in a certain way. So I think that's another
Yeah.
important point, is that when we are giving, when we are in these supportive philanthropic roles, we need to be unattached to what they're going to do with that support, because it's not up to us. And so if you're not willing to give, and be unattached to the outcome, then maybe there's other ways that you can find yourself in reciprocity or support that feel more
Yeah,
alive. But it's just the reality.
totally. Yeah, totally. And it comes down, I just wrote down like, what you just described comes from that kind of that colonial mindset. So it's another opportunity of decolonizing our minds, which comes back to community orientation, like amplifying what's there, being of service, but not like it's not our ideas, it's not or whatever. Like look at how incredibly the Yawanawa have utilized social media and a world presence, sharing their songs. That's a direct extension of their ecological work, right? These are, again, people that have not forgotten that we are intimately linked and extensions of the natural world, like our culture is convinced everyone of. And so part of their mission, right, of protecting the environment is not always just bringing people to their lands, but it's also going places and bringing their songs and offering their culture and singing their prayers, and within those spaces that I've even been able to witness, like holding the space for the reality of the rivers that are poisoned and the things that are changing, and they're saying, hey, like global stuff has impacted and we're calling for help. And there's a lot of people that need help all over the world, and I've always learned you just kind of got to choose. So for whatever reason, this Utah boy got called into service with a frog, and it's led me on this wacky journey. And if I can at least just really hold myself accountable to, again, not just understanding how it works, but understanding the people and hearing their stories, and bringing those into the way that I hold this medicine, then that feels like a good way to create opportunities across to everyone that I'm engaging with. in my opinion.
That's amazing. I so value that work, and everything you're bringing to the world with those ethos. And yeah, just thank you so much for taking the time and like sharing, your wisdom, as a practitioner with, vitalism and herbalism and Kambo, and just as like a beautiful person moving through the world with impact.
Aw.
Thank you for sharing, your story of your time in the jungle and your journey with Kambo, with your teachers, and the birth of your company, Earth Medicine Apparel. I think it's so cool. I need to get myself a T-shirt. Maybe next time I'm in the U.S., I'll make sure that I
Yeah.
get one. So yeah, as we wrap up, I would love, to be able to share with other people where they can find out more about you, about your company, and connect with you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm so grateful. So, if any listeners live in the Front Range or the Western Slope or Southwestern Colorado, if they're interested in sitting with me with Combo, I do not have an online presence with Combo, but I have an email. So they can reach me at rainbowheartcombo@gmail.com. And I offer a sliding scale. I have a direct source of where my combo gives. I give 25% back to our Peruvian kin. And I just want to say that I really have a special affinity and I've developed a deep love of supporting other service providers. So, nurses, yoga instructors, body workers, psychedelic facilitators, therapists. Like, I've been really enjoying holding space. So, if that's you and you're listening, rainbowheartcombo@gmail.com. And then if folks are interested in checking out my sacred streetwear brand, Earth Medicine Apparel Company, you can find me at earthmed.clothing. And I'm on Instagram at Earth Medicine Apparel Co. And if you go to my website, you can also find our impact page, and we have links to our GoFundMe that we're running nonstop for Uli Rios Java and her and Johnny's family. And then also continue to pledge 5% of product margin from our rainforest collection to support them. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Johnny. It was truly a joy to have this conversation. And I think we touched on so many deep points just all over the map, but that's just
Mhm.
what we do when we have conversations, it seems. So yeah, I'm so grateful for, all the ways that you kind of are a thought pioneer and really leading with your heart in your world, your life, your work. So deep appreciation and gratitude for you, my brother. And yeah, I'll, be posting everything that he just mentioned in the show notes so you can get access to that information and go check out his offerings, his websites. His designs are really freaking cool. So I highly encourage you to check them out. And they make great gifts, for family, loved ones, but also just knowing that you're also giving the gift to Indigenous communities that really do authentically need the support. So thank you again for your time, Johnny. Thank you to all of our listeners
Thank you,
for tuning
Caitlin.
in. Yes, and I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. So stay tuned for more Kambo Convos, on our next Frogcast episodes. Tuning out, and thank you all.